All right, I think we'll get started. Some folks might be joining later. Um, Hi, everyone. My name is Ran Yan. I'm the executive director of Lewis Latimer House Museum. Wanted to give a brief visual description for people joining on the phone or people can't see their screen. I'm a 32-year-old East Asian Chinese woman with short hair, and in the polka dots shirt. In my background is an image of the new installation at the Lewis Latimer House Museum garden called Beacon, and it's shaped like a light bulb taken from Lewis Latimer's blueprint. And you can see in the image, a part of the installation illuminates when, just like the light bulb does. And there's also some cherry blossoms in the background. Thank you everyone again for joining us. Some of you might already know Lewis Latimer was a Black inventor, poet, painter, and humanist. And his home in Flushing, Queens today is a museum where we host regular literature events, including this writing workshop. This is the second year we're doing it, and we're really proud to have this opportunity to offer to Queens local writers to tell their stories and hone their voice. I would like to introduce you to our wonderful, before I make that introduction, I just wanted to briefly acknowledge that the Lewis Latimer House Museum is located on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Manse Lenape and Matinicock people. We pay respects to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And with that, now I would like to introduce our wonderful instructor, Abeer Hoque. She is a Nigerian-born Bangladeshi American writer and photographer. Her books include a travel photography and poetry monograph, The Long Way Home, a linked collection of stories, poems, and photographs, The Lovers and the Leavers, and the Memoir, Olive Witch. She has won fellowships from the NEA, NIFA, and the Fulbright Foundation, and holds BS and MA degrees from the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business, and an MFA in writing from the University of San Francisco. I will share more resources on both the Lewis Latimer House Museum and also on our instructor, Abeer, in the chat. And please welcome Abeer Hoque.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I was going to just also remind everyone to put their Zoom onto, we're all old hat at this now, but maybe put your Zoom onto speaker view so whoever's speaking will have the floor. So welcome. I'm so happy to see all of you. My name is Abeer. I'm a 48-year-old woman with curly green hair, wearing a purple top. My background is some bookshelves in a room lined with fairy lights. So thanks to Ran and Lewis Latimer House. This is the second time I'm teaching this course, and I'm so blown away by my workshop participants. They're incredible and varied stories, their wild and diverse backgrounds, and most of all, their exceedingly thoughtful and kind participation in class. This particular class has ties to Bangladesh, Guyana, Nepal, China, the Philippines, all connected through our beautiful borough of Queens. Together, we created a warm and supportive space to share our stories, many of which were deeply intimate and often painful stories about race and immigration. I have personally found our sessions enlightening and cathartic and inspiring, and I learned so much from every single person in class. So I'm grateful to each of you and so excited to share some of your stories with the audience today. Just so that you all know what to expect, we're going to have 6 readers, each reading for about 10 minutes. We'll run straight through without a break, and afterwards we'll take a little time to take some questions for our reader.
How do you do this?
And just remember to mute yourselves when you're not speaking. By request of the workshop participants, I'm going to read a short memoir piece myself from my memoir, Olive Witch. So this is a piece from the very early part of the book, which is set in Nigeria, where I was born. And I'm 7 in this section. It's called Red and Orange. Nsukka is a small town in a valley in southeastern Nigeria. The mornings and evenings are cool enough to wear blazers, but the afternoons are roasting. During the rainy season, there's a thunderstorm every afternoon. The sky turns black and roars. Then the rain comes. We're in the dry season now. It's called Harmattan, after the desert winds that travel thousands of miles from northern Africa all the way to the West African coast. It's not going to rain for months. The ground thins, losing its red skin to the incessant wind. Dust blows everywhere. We have to sweep twice a day, or our feet leave footprints on the floor. Our lips crack and our limbs turn gray in the dry heat. This Harmattan, Jami Mama, my mother's youngest brother, has come to visit from Ankara, Turkey, where he is studying architecture. He presents my sister Simi and me with red and orange cotton dresses. And there's a tiny button-up shirt for my brand new baby brother, Maher. Simi and I interrupt our hopscotch game straight away and run into our parents' bedroom to try on the dresses. Brush your hair, my mother tells me, as she does every few hours. My hair is curly and refuses to sit neatly if it isn't tied back. I ignore her as I preen in the mirror, holding my hopscotch stone in my hand. The hem of my new dress barely settles around my knees before I run back outside. After Jami Mama leaves, Simi and I have a fight about which dress is hers and which is mine. We're only a year and a half apart, so the dresses are the same size. The orange dress is mine, I shout. I remember wearing it when we got them. Simi's face is streaked with tears. No, the red one is yours. The orange one is mine. You're wrong. You don't remember anything. I was wearing the orange one. It is mine. We go on like this until I bully Simi into agreeing with me. This is nothing new. As the oldest, I've been getting my way for 7 years now. My evil eye is legendary in my family. But this time, I'm right. I can see my reflection in the mirror wearing the orange dress. Months later, while leafing through our photo album, I come across a Polaroid picture of our family from when Jami Mama came to visit. We're in our front compound in front of my mother's white rose bushes. In the picture, my uncle is holding my naked baby brother high in the air, and I know with hindsight, Maher is about to pee on him. My mother is sitting on the veranda steps laughing. She has curly hair like mine, only longer and pulled tightly into a ponytail. Her face, though, is like Simi's, round and open and fair. My father is wearing that faint air of amusement he wears only in photographs. He stands head and shoulders above us. My uncle is only a little taller than my mother. The ground beneath us is red and dusty, and I'm looking sullen because I hate taking pictures. My sister is standing to Jami Mama's left, smiling her brilliant smile. She's wearing the orange dress. In that moment, I realize memory is a treacherous thing, and I'm extra nice to Simi for a little while. All right, so that's my little piece, and without further ado, I want to introduce our first reader. Christina is a born and raised New Yorker and a product of the Asian diaspora. She's inspired by history and interested in cultivating conversations and relationship building. She appreciates yellow sweaters and giving tarot readings. Please welcome Christina.
Hi, I'm Christina. I am a Chinese American woman in her early 30s with shoulder length dark brown hair. I'm wearing a black top with a pattern of white rectangles all over it, and I'm sitting against a white wall. So I'm assuming I can just launch right into this. Great. Okay. Yeah, I think I'll just really briefly say thank you to everybody in the space and everybody in the workshop. I would like to say the first time I understood the term gatekeeping, I was reading something meaningful or even reputable, like The New Yorker. But the truth is, the first time I really heard the term, I was complaining again. It felt like for the millionth time, I was talking about my job, about my boss, about my inability to understand how I was being tossed around in an ocean of emotions only to brace for the incoming waves of a constant, formidable storm. Yet when it was said to me so plainly, it felt as if a constant ringing in my head stopped. Sometimes chance reaches out and grabs you, sometimes by collars and other times by shirt tails. Sudden and subtle, abrupt, maybe even confrontational, but always tinged with a bit of unexpectedness. And perhaps that's how, out of pure dumb luck, one can find themselves working in a world that they never grew up immersed in. Chance introduces you to a vocabulary list you didn't even know was needed to pass the exam. Words like asset and value were never a part of my education, but neither were perfectionism, sense of urgency, defensiveness, fear of open conflict, and the right to comfort. After all, only American girls can afford to be soft, to have time to prescribe meaning to words that cannot easily be translated from English. My parents arrived in Chinatown in the late 1960s during one of the largest surges in immigration from Asia in United States history. It's hard for me to imagine what it was like for them to acclimate to a new place that would soon be known as Fear City. Yet, Kevin and Elaine Chan learned to navigate this new home with skills born out of a cultural vibrancy as well as necessity. My mother would learn to wear her wedding ring inverted, always clasping the diamond in her palm. My grandfather would eventually downgrade my father to a more responsible car in hopes of curtailing his fast driving habits. Without knowing it, the maps they created in their own youth would be passed on to my sister and me growing up. As a kid, I could close my eyes and see the streets of Chinatown down to the very last detail of each building's stoop. A fresh coat of paint, a new scar on the staircase, graffiti buffed and rebuffed. These images became an internalized map of the neighborhood that felt comforting, as easy as drawing with my favorite little twin stars lead pencil. When I was finally deemed old enough to go out on my own, this map always gave me reason to be unafraid and even a bit mischievous. My internal landmarking was always the way home. It was never having to admit that I was lost or could be lost, even for just a few blocks. Maps are continuously drawn and redrawn. Like tectonic plates, neighborhoods can be reshaped and landscapes irrevocably changed by the hand of nature, real estate developers, and even business improvement districts. After the completion of the Panama Canal in 1915, the Panama Pacific International Exposition was held in San Francisco. Touted as a celebration of this new waterway, it was widely seen as an opportunity to showcase the recovery of the city after its 1906 earthquake. With a moment magnitude of 7.9, the earthquake destroyed lives, property, and communities. For some, however, it was also an opportunity to reimagine the city without a Chinatown, or at least a much smaller one on its outskirts. As a temporary installation designed for and showcased at the exposition's Chinese pavilion, the first Chinese gate was established in the United States. In the style of a paifang, it became the calling card for Chinatowns all over the world. More contemporary iterations have come about through a variety of ways, sometimes as gifts or through local community and governmental financing. Today, Manhattan's Chinatown Partnership Local Development Corporation website asserts it has the dubious distinction of being the only Chinatown in North America without a gateway. Gates have always been signifiers of movement. Their purpose is to offer location and destination, each suggesting a world of possibilities when traversed. If brave enough, unrattled by exotic shape and sound, one learns how to navigate it with more depth. In their inhale, gates welcome. In their exhale, they keep you at arm's length. But in New York City, there's no Dragon's Gate or Friendship Archway. No hello or goodbye or no aloha, as the song says. Depending on who and when you ask, the neighborhood occasionally reaches for the East River, and at times is bound up in the backyards of other communities like the Lower East Side. Traversing Madison Street is like walking along a flexed upper arm that ends at the crook of an elbow. Running parallel for a brief moment to the FDR Drive, it ends where the island turns upward, as if carrying a bag of groceries at the bend. My grandmother once asked me what my niece's American name was, and I replied Madison. She greeted this fact with some confusion, unable to recognize the word until her home attendant responded, "You know it. It's a street. You used to walk there all the time." In youth, you never question the lack of something unless you're confronted with the knowledge of an alternate possibility. As a mischief maker, you don't think of yourself as crossing boundaries, but rather moving between them. Without a gate or a map, does anyone really know where they are? The Paifang itself possesses a type of permeability, a coming and going, always ajar. But when is this porousness purely symbolic, and when is it about the economics of self-preservation? Unlike stone and brick, gatekeeping is the negotiation of entry. It maintains secrets and only reveals strategically. It's where stories of dead ends appear just as the plot becomes interesting. What then does it mean to be allowed to enter, to pass, to cross a threshold? Is it when your value is predicated on a series of fortunate happenstances? Government assistance in Cantonese is literally giving fortune. It's as if your lot in life came from the sky, and you should thank your little twin stars for where it got you. A very white hand descended from the clouds to give you this gift of terra firma. That same hand will decide that you are an asset when you can be exploited to work land, to stitch cloth together, to chop meat behind an obstructed view of geese hanging by their necks, or to not receive overtime when exceeding a 40-hour work week. The most common time of day my supervisor would approach me were the moments where I would leave my desk. Her requests would always begin as a sheepish ask, interrupting or stalling lunch, a bathroom break, or the end to my day. These tiny inconveniences became sites of negotiation, whereby at the end of each interaction, I was left wondering what futures I wanted to lay claim to, where my identities seemingly began and ended. My right to stand on solid ground often felt like the ebb and flow of waves, subject only to flirtations with greeting land, only to be reeled back as quickly as you tasted safety. To be kept by these waves is to perpetuate a ripple of power. Almost every email I wrote during the course of 2.5 years were vetted. My words held the power to reveal withheld. Every responsibility felt like a trap, and every disagreement felt like a denial. An inhale and an exhale. But in truth, weren't you always at America's gates, someone else's shores? Even before my family arrived here, each new negotiation came with a lingering ghost. The legacy of exclusion carries on as a legacy of gatekeeping. Terms like gatekeeping felt like ones I learned under trial by fire. Now that the ringing has stopped and I can think with more care and sobriety, I realize it has unknowingly always been a part of the map I created as a child. The store on Mott Street that carries the little twin star pencils near the cash register also sells Chinese language magazines and newspapers. In the rear of the store is an entire section devoted to red envelopes and paper couplets. The ones from my youth almost always had stylized symbols for luck: dragons, phoenixes, fish, bamboo, each encircling the character for fortune. Covered in a gold that would flake off when you touched it, the character was always central and featured prominently. Of course, the desire to welcome luck means placing the couplet on a door, a gate. Its inversion to the untrained eye looks preposterous, a mistake even. But upside down, the character means fortune has arrived.
Thank you, Christina. That was wonderful. All right, our next reader is Michele Gilliam, who is the Deputy Political Director at the Action Center for Race and the Economy. A native of Southeast Queens, New York, Michele is also a writer and a teaching artist, running creative writing workshops for the New York Writers Coalition. She dabbles in fiction, but is currently working on a memoir, working title, A Mad Woman in Her Most Incandescent Bloom, which chronicles her experience working in the labor movement and for 3 presidential campaigns.
Don't talk, I have you on mute.
Her first play, Displaced,
No, just listen.
was read at the Castillo Theater in 2012. Please welcome Michele.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Michele. I'm Black. I have locks. They have multiple colors, and I have a shirt that says Union on it. Happy May Day, everybody. Happy International Workers' Day. This is going to be an excerpt from my, memoir, A Mad Woman in Her Most Incandescent Bloom. And it skips around a little bit because it's a part of a chapter, but it starts off in our Brooklyn headquarters. And I'll dive into it. I had now been on Team Hillary for almost 2 months. It was a massive organization, and I familiarized myself with the good people who populated the seating chart along with their official titles and their unofficial influence. There are more casual conversations and fewer cynical gazes. No longer just the Bernie girl, I was trusted and welcomed as part of the team. My desk was in striking distance of Maxwell, one of the core people in the Obama 2008 nucleus. We shared the same complexion and honed in on the shared experience that stemmed from it with respect. After a string of days of being 10 minutes late, he made sure to send a directive to Nikki instructing me to tighten it up. Yet, he also made a point to pull up a chair one afternoon, help himself to my communal white cheddar popcorn, and playfully dig at one of my many quirks. I was part of the family, and it felt really, really good, almost easy, until it wasn't. Nikki emailed me to inform me that I had a meeting with her and Sam, another Black man high up on the totem pole. His desk was diagonal to mine. Maybe it had actually been him and not Maxwell who had noticed my tardiness. But I had corrected it, I thought, making sure to leave my house much earlier to arrive on time. Was it my work product then? I oversaw fewer states than my parallel in the labor department, which I believe accommodated for my inexperience, but maybe it was still insufficient. I was struggling to materialize the volunteer shifts outlined in the labor mobilization plan Nikki created. Maybe they knew I was in over my head. Hey there, Sam said upon my entry into the conference room. You can close the door behind you. Nikki was already in the room, sitting perpendicular to him and eventually me as well. None of this felt good. Sam wasted no time and got right to it. So we want you to spend the remainder of the campaign in Las Vegas, Nevada. This was a big thing, not my ineptitude, not my tardiness, not my lack of professionalism. I was relieved but baffled. Vegas, for exactly how long? Where was I going to live? When did they want me to leave? The July sun basked in the office, illuminating every single emotion that must have surfaced on my face because both he and Nikki answered the questions ruminating in my mind. I was to leave in 2 weeks and start on Labor Day. The irony did not miss me, residing in supporter housing that was already confirmed, erasing my fears from my early house insecure days in New Hampshire. Nevada was one of the states in my portfolio, and although small, it was a key swing state. It was a key swing state because of the competitive Senate race. I was tasked with being generally helpful to the state team, including assisting the labor local mobilization efforts. After the meeting, Nikki came to my desk, pulling up a chair. "Are you sure you're okay?" "Oh yes, definitely," I replied with genuine feeling. "This is far more time than I was given in the past." "Well, you and I will check in more in the next week and make sure you're all good, okay? I was worried because you seemed a little uneasy in the meeting." I tried to emphasize my gratitude. "Oh no, I'm totally excited to get out in the field," I said, hoping to sound convincing. "I mean, I think Vegas is ridiculous and tacky, but I really want to be on the ground, no matter where." She seemed convinced. I hope I did not seem ungrateful, considering I still had a lot to prove, and more importantly, we still had to win. Fast forward. There were only 3 weeks left. October 16, 2016 was the final presidential debate in Las Vegas. We were ordered to the University of Las Vegas early that morning to conduct visibility, that is, getting a group of chanting supporters together to hold up signs for our candidate. Staff packed in closely with volunteers behind the camera crews, which were lined on the periphery of the campus. We were crawling towards Election Day, beat down by stress and fatigue. But that day, we cheerfully frolicked to the campus, ready to enthuse for hours and hours before the debate started. I wasn't sure what others were tasked with afterward, but I had been asked to immediately proceed to the spin room and staff Jesse Jackson. I had no idea what a spin room was, but making things up as I went along was my motif. I did not care to be ambitious and change routine, especially now that we were 3 weeks out. I was eager to spend all day doing visibility, considering how strained both my mental and physical strength were. It had been a favorite of mine since New Hampshire for Bernie days because you didn't have to use any brain power. You were required to do nothing more but to be loud and make noise. This was my natural gift. I arrived at the site in my usual fashion, late, only slightly though, ready to share with the team. Only what I saw at first was a glaring visual of the terror we were up against. There were Trump flags, some handheld, some the size of banners. Of course, I had seen these signs before, including the 4 on the same block of my supporter housing, but I had never been in close proximity with Trump voters. Up until then, they were like viruses, real, visceral, yet invisible threats. It was jarring how viciously Donald Trump's hatred translated through the crowd of his supporters. They bullied and yelled at our staff, especially the Latino ones. Initially, their efforts were about fighting for physical space and the camera's view, excuse me. Then it was chants about freedom or patriotism. I couldn't make out much of their rhetoric through the sundry of obscenities and slurs. These same people love the Second Amendment and really, really hate Black and brown people and women. Were we even safe? The makeshift Trump signs added more emphasis. Many were variations on build the wall and other conspiracy theories. Michelle Obama had told us months earlier, when they go low, we go high. A Black Trump supporter who managed to rock both a bushy ponytail and finger waves pointed directly at me and called me a mammy during one of his rantings. Maybe I was subconsciously listening to my namesake. Maybe I was fearful, but I laughed it off and tried hard to concentrate on holding my sign and yelling stronger together. After hours of standing and holding non-hateful signs and shouting non-hateful things, I was even more exhausted, approaching my emotional breaking point. I rushed into the bathroom and changed into an all-Black ensemble, a suit jacket, tailored pants, and kitten heels. I concealed the emerging darkness under my eyes, patted my forehead with powder, buried my lips. Grabbing a 2-foot triangular prism with the words Jesse Jackson stretched out on its 3 sides, I rushed back to the holding room where we each waited for our surrogates. All of this happened while the debate got underway. Most of the staffers were watching the live stream on their phones as there were no televisions around. I was following on my Facebook news feed. I trusted my friend's commentary more than anybody on TV. That night, Donald Trump was able to dig further into the depths of his depravity. In response to Hillary's explanation about how she would improve the solvency of the National Security Program, Social Security Program, including easing taxes on the wealthy, she indicated that contribution would effectively go up if we did not do something. Assuming he can't figure out how to get out of it, she said, to which she replied, such a nasty woman. Outrage and Janet Jackson inspired memes immediately ensued, but I couldn't laugh. Nasty Woman had joined Bad Hombres in the growing list of displays of xenophobia and hatred. By this point, Trump had vilified Latinos, immigrants, Muslims, women, Black people, and even the disability community. He had been caught on audio instructing Billy Bush to grab them by the pussy. In the previous debate in St. Louis, he would dismiss his remarks as locker room talk. In tonight's debate, he had decided to double down with the misogyny. After the debate ended, I ended up following Jesse Jackson around for about another hour. My arms strained to hold my prism edifice high, inviting news stations to interview Jesse. This was what a spin room entailed. All this so Jesse could make the case for Hillary Clinton. The whole day had been ridiculous, unfortunate, truly despicable. Exactly how could someone as profoundly disgusting as Trump, with offenses mounting by the day, still be viable? I was on a historic presidential campaign with a civil rights icon who once made history with his own presidential campaign. I was also so tired. My fury was compounded with the draining stress of having to argue why we needed to reject Donald Trump and everything he stood for. I couldn't appreciate the experience anymore. I am afraid what will happen if Trump wins, but I'm also afraid what will happen if Trump loses. That was my Facebook status the day after the debate on 4 hours of sleep. Fast forward a little more. At this point, the official Hillary Clinton campaign and the millions of people who had joined the fight with us were operating on love and caffeine. So similarly to how people sacrifice and stash away savings for a big purchase like a house or a car, we were all trekking along miserably because we knew, but we knew that on November 10th, we could sleep in, possibly induced by alcohol, and exhale collectively. At the Vegas headquarters, we had all booked cheap hotel rooms on the Strip for election night. It was true that people who live in Vegas rarely go to the Strip, including brief transplants like me. However, we were planning for a night of celebration where we would watch the returns and then partake in the shenanigans of casinos and clubs. We deserved it. Hell, we needed it. In the final weeks of the fight, I ran into some old friends, which was refreshing. More and more, I was witnessing Bernie supporters and their efforts to defeat Trump. That was their zeroed in focus. It seemed pretty convincing to me. Some had channeled their advocacy through progressive organizations like Move On. I ran into 2 New Hampshire for Bernie staffers staging location. One of them was wearing a t-shirt for PSCC, and I happened to have my TWU shirt on. We took a picture to illustrate that it was not only okay for progressives to vote for Hillary, but it was the only responsible thing to do. On November 4th, I posted this following Facebook status. I am voting for the millions of undocumented immigrants who show up for work every day like the rest of us, but face constant fear of being deported and having everything taken away from them. I am voting for unions whose existence will largely be eroded if the Supreme Court passes Friedrichs. I am voting for Black people who have collectively become increasingly cynical and disillusioned following the slow recovery from the Great Recession and the trauma stemming from high-profile police-involved shootings. I am voting for half of the population whose reproductive freedoms remain in constant jeopardy. When I cast my vote, I voted for someone who has vowed to make strides towards clean energy, universal health care, and criminal justice reform. I voted for the person who is in the best position to advance issues I care about. Some of you choose to vote for protest. I choose to vote for progress. That was my sentiment and plea to all the people in the trenches. It was exactly a week before Election Day, but I knew the cadence in my voice hinted at the baggage I was lugging around in my soul. A few times during my daily "I'm barely alive" / "I miss home" calls with my mom, we have reflected on my father's kindness. Within his lifetime, he had served. I'm just gonna pause and wait for the train to. Within his lifetime, he had suffered through the contradiction of being Black in America, leaving Jim Crow, Virginia to serve in the Korean War, raising 3 kids in Queens, tracking us all for college, even as the city elected mayors that stopped and frisked us and sided with the murderers of unarmed Black men. This was a city that placed limits on where he could live, even as a public servant, because of the color of his skin. A city that would pull the rug from under our schools and hospitals and public transit. In the constant quicksand of oppression and degradation, my father managed to choose empathy over bitterness, service over complacency. Even after a year of what was certainly a draining, deteriorating political landscape, my experience paled in comparison to what Black people had endured generations before me. So in the end, I knew that it would be okay because in just 1 week, it would be all over and Trump would be a thing of the past.
Thank you, Michele. Just a moment. All right, so our next reader is Lu Han, who was born in China and immigrated to the US at the age of 5. She lived in the Bronx and Queens and currently lives in Hell's Kitchen. She's a Barnard College graduate, a lefty, a rock climber, and an ice cream aficionado. Please welcome Lu.
Thank you. Thanks, Abeer. Thanks everyone for joining. First, I wanted to say that it's my dad's birthday. So happy birthday to my dad. And then secondly, I haven't done this before. So I am a mid-30s, age unknown Chinese American woman. I am sitting in front of a window, partially drawn, with shades partially drawn and sheer curtains at my parents' house. I have longish hair and bangs that I haven't changed for 10 years, and I'm wearing a sweater tank. I'm not sure when they started making these, but I love them. Okay, here it goes. I'll be reading parts from different pieces that I wrote for the workshop. Part 1, you speak of days that begin in the middle of the night, of digging at frozen ground with your bare hands, of waking up under blankets frozen stiff at the edges. How did you get here? Where do we start? From 1968 to 1978, 17 million youths dispersed from cities to the countryside. Young men and women boarded trains, flatbed trucks, and horse-pulled carts. After a full day of travel, they reached their new homes, mountains and farmland. They traded single-room apartments that housed their entire families for small houses shared with strangers. They left gritty brick buildings and sooty air for single-story houses and an enormous, impossible sky. At the train station, they wore their bravado like a child's toy shield. They smiled widely until, once out of their family's sight, their faces crumpled and shoulders sagged. There was at least one face, if you could pick it out of the crowd, that was not strained with the facade of composure. My mother at 18, curls tamed in a pair of braids, stood ready to board. All around her were young men and women barely out of childhood, fussing and being fussed at. Some waved little red books as they boarded. I see my mother facing her own family with squared shoulders, looking straight at her mother and father, and then at her Jie, her older sister, a hardworking nurse. Next, is her Meimei, the youngest of the family. Here, my mother's gaze softens for a moment. Of the three sisters, her Meimei was the only one who clung to their mother for affection. She was the only one who knew instinctively to submit to their father's indiscriminate fury, to beg for forgiveness until even he ceased to see the point in continuing. And she would be the only one of the three daughters to grow out of childhood free of burn marks and scars. I asked my mother, so then getting on a plane to another country by yourself, leaving behind your family, a good job, a medical degree, without knowing when Dad and I would join you, this was not the hardest thing you've done? My mother thinks a minute. She was a part of the sent down generation, yes, but she went willingly. The tide of the Cultural Revolution would eventually ebb, and 4 years later, sweep my mother back to the city along with other youth who survived. She returned with scars on her arms and her fingers swelled at the joints permanently. Years later, she would look at her hands and insist they were once long and slender. There were other ways she carried her 4 years in the countryside with her. She knew how to hack at sunflowers that towered over her 5'3" frame with a blade after cutting her hand and nearly losing her thumb. She learned that rain in the winter months froze the corn solid in the ground and threatened a rotted harvest. She knew that clawing night after night at icy ground failed to salvage crops, but succeeded in splitting the skin between her fingers wide open like the mouths of koi fish. She knew it was possible to wake up at 3 a.m, walk an hour to get to the field, work for 6 hours, walk back for lunch, and then out to the field again until sundown, facing an endless row of corn stalks stretching into the horizon. She knew it was possible to work this way each day. The sun, rain, and seasons do not take weekends or holidays. Neither did those who work the fields. A break from work without a break in feeding yourself or your family was not something my mother knew yet. Even after moving to America, where there was an abundance of time off, weekends, holidays, something called vacations, among many other abundances, it took my mother years to understand that these were not luxuries, but commonplace, available even to a foreigner. Part 2. From middle school until junior year of high school, we lived at the edge of Queens in a neighborhood rich with Indo-Chinese fusion restaurants, Indian sweet shops with trays of gulab jamun and ras malai, a Mandy's stocked with flared low-rise jeans, eyebrow threading salons, and a bustling Blockbuster where my parents and I spent many Friday evenings. The summer before my senior year, we moved to Westchester. I mourned the loss of the hour-and-a-half commute with my friends, an all-girl group, 4 Indian, 1 Sri Lankan, 1 Chinese, plucked straight from a census report of outer Queens. Time spent laughing, falling asleep on strangers' shoulders, scratching out the last sentences of an essay due that day, balancing an open textbook on one arm during rush hour, building immunity to the mossy scent of wet rubber in a packed subway car on rainy days, all gone in one move. Instead, I had a quiet train ride with a view of the Palisades across the Hudson River. Around me, men in suits and solid neckties sat under blasting air conditioners, their noses buried in the Wall Street Journal. Years later, I learned that my mother wanted me to have my own room and bathroom. My mother, who didn't have her own apartment until at 35, she moved halfway across the world, was determined that I should have 4 walls to call my own before I had a driver's license. But at that time, I only saw my losses. A final year of memory-making subway rides with my best friends, my Sweet Valley paperbacks, impromptu sleepovers, a drawing gifted from an obscenely talented friend in my sophomore year. I can't remember a single compound from 2 years of chemistry classes, but I can still see his drawing. I close my eyes and a girl appears on the page, sketched in graphite. She stands on an elevated platform facing lower Manhattan. High-speed trains float centimeters above a magnetized track along the West Side Highway, while drone-like vehicles swoop between buildings. In the distance, twin structures rise, reconceived in stunning form, pale, gleaming, organic, embedded into the jawline of this city, resurrected and glorious. His futuristic rendering of the city was fantastical, an absurdity. I understood and accepted the above-ground bullet trains and flying taxis, but the Twin Towers, rebuilt and reimagined, standing tall in place of the gaping hole, full of smoldering metal and ashed bones. This was beyond my scope. How was it possible for him to envision this? He was with me that day. We walked side by side under an unbroken blue sky, the Hudson River to our left, and a burning orphaned building behind us, soon to join its fallen brother. Part 3. Dad was the second of 6 children, born to an illiterate mother and a fiercely devoted father. His family defined all families for me, where every gathering was rowdiness and good cheer. My dad and his brothers share the same deep grooves across their foreheads and generous, unrestrained laughter. His mother and father, my Nainai and Ye, earned pennies a day selling xiegao from a cart. After moving to the Bronx, I would say snow cake, the literal translation of xiegao, when asking for ice cream. This was during the brief period when I still formed thoughts, first in Chinese and translated word by word to English. In 1991, many years before Pizza Hut and KFC proliferated in major cities in China, pizza was as foreign to me as I was to the Bronx. In the elementary school lunch hall, bursting with the echoes of kids chattering, I had my first startling encounter with pizza. The acidity of the tomato sauce stung my tongue and I stopped mid-chew, wondering why anybody would eat something covered with such a strange, tangy sauce. The crust, however, was a relief and a welcome reminder of the milky breads and red bean buns that sustained me. I navigated the slice carefully, nibbling the edges to avoid the tart tomatoes and limp, elastic cheese. Eventually, I added peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to my lunch rotation. Carbohydrates, I learned early, is a unifying language. My dad's childhood was marked both with the warmth of a close family and at the same time never having enough sweet mantou or sticky rice cakes he was so fond of. Meat was scarce and even rice was often rationed. Yet every Lunar New Year, Nainai and Ye ensured a feast for their children, even if it cost their entire year's savings. Before my family left for the US, we would gather at my Nainai and Ye's home every New Year's in the same one-story, flat-roofed house my dad grew up in. Dinner preparation started early, and by the afternoon, dishes crowded atop a large wooden table. Pork and chive dumplings, whole fish braised in ginger and scallion, soy sauce and sugar marinated pork belly, roasted peanuts. My aunts circled around my mother, accumulating small piles of sunflower seed shells at their feet as they ate and chatted. My dad lit cigarettes with my uncles as they filled small glass cups all the way with baijiu, until the famous Chinese spirit sloshed over the rims. They raised full glasses and slammed them back on the table emptied, shouting, "Ganbei," dry cups, while smoke from half a dozen cigarettes unfurled around the room. Every male in my dad's family and seemingly all of China picked up smoking as a teen. It seemed less a rite of passage and more a natural transition to adulthood, like shaving facial hair. My dad stopped smoking when he reunited with my mother in the US. Without his family jostling around the dinner table and no one to slam stout glasses of Baijiu with, he put away the cigarettes. Our first few years here, I noticed my father and mother would get quiet at the dinner table as February rolled around. If I looked closer, I saw that they were teary, their eyes shining and red-rimmed. Over time, I came to understand why my dad returned from every grocery trip with Costco portion muffins and enough bananas to stock a small bodega, all for our family of 3. And as an adult, I stopped wondering why every time I came home for dinner, they prepared a feast worthy of any New Year's celebration, even though I insisted on a simple meal. Whenever you are home, my boss says as he heaps more rice into my bowl, it's New Year's for us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Lou. Our next reader is Michele Pinzon. She's a Filipina American living in Flushing, Queens. She's excited to participate in the first reading and writing of what she hopes will one day be her memoir. Please welcome Michele.
Hi, my name is Michele Pinzon. I am a 46-year-old woman. I'm wearing a red shirt, red tank top, long black hair, and I'm in a hotel room. Okay, this piece is called Mestizo. The TV had been on nonstop, and we were all glued to it, watching nonstop. The faces were haunting. The photos and signs that their relatives were holding up were so sad, and their pleas for any help finding their relatives were unbearable to hear. It was just a few days after 9/11 that I saw Mark's face on TV. He had become one of the many victims of the towers falling. His wife was holding their young son, and she had a picture of him, his name, and some identifying marks, his tattoos. He was an EMS worker who had responded when the first tower fell. When he entered the second tower, the entire thing collapsed while he had been running up the stairs to help people. His body was never found. I first met Mark at a fashion show that we both had modeled in when I was in college. He was so cute. I found out later he was mestizo, half Filipino and half white. We got to talking, and as we ate the cheese and cracker snacks left for us to munch on while we waited for our turn to be dressed up in the latest designers' fashions. We were immediately drawn to each other, and we started dating shortly after. He would pick me up on his motorcycle from my dorm. I loved cruising in the city on the back of his bike. We were young and wild in New York City on a motorcycle. How could we not have fun? I thought it was so cool holding on to his extra passenger helmet in my dorm for all my roommates and college friends to see. Yes, I had a boyfriend. Yes, he was a hot motorcycle dude. And yes, he was so tall and handsome with beautiful brown eyes and brown hair like Keanu Reeves, a real man. No college boys for me, thank you very much. I could tell though that a part of him was lost. He confessed to me that he was searching really hard for his heritage. While I was trying to escape from it, he was running toward it. He wanted so badly to know what being Filipino was like. All he knew was that he was mixed. His mom was Filipino and his dad was white. While he was ethnically Filipino, he had been adopted and wasn't surrounded by Filipino culture like I was. So he was drawn to anything Filipino. And I suppose that may have been partially why he was attracted to me. For him, I was a connection to his lost heritage, a beautiful brown Filipina. But not really, I was American. Hello, I was born here in the good old US of A. He wanted to know everything about me, about how I grew up, about my parents. He loved staying in my parents' house with me on the weekends, eating the food, calling everyone tito, tita, lola, lolo, like he already belonged, like he was already part of the family. A few years before we met, Mark had met his biological for the first time out in South Dakota, Mr. James T. Sullins, an American soldier stationed in the Philippines. After one of his trips to see his dad, he had given me an arrowhead that he found while hiking with his father. Mark had found it Mark had found out from his father that he was part Sioux. I proudly wore the arrowhead on a piece of black leather and told friends a story of how it came to be around my neck. I still have it somewhere in one of my jewelry boxes. Mark's biological mom was another story. He had searched long and hard for her until he finally found her. While we were together, he told me he was going back to the Philippines to meet her for the first time. He was nervous and scared, but he had waited so long for this moment. I told him I would miss him, that he should call me when he landed and tell me all about it. The first time Mark met his biological mother was on a TV show in the Philippines. One of the most popular talk show hostesses wanted to show all of the Philippines how she had reunited a mother and son, a son lost to America that had come back looking for her. One of my cousins excitedly told me about how she watched my boyfriend reunite with his mom in front of millions of people. Ay, naku, Michelle, he is so guapo kaayo. I was so proud of my guapo mestizo boyfriend. Although if I had to admit to myself, I was slightly scared and nervous that I would lose him to the islands and their magic. Let's be honest, beautiful Filipino women are a dime a dozen over there. But here, I'm exotic. And Mark was hot. I can only imagine all those girls throwing themselves at him because he's this good-looking American. But only he knew that what had created his great looks also caused his greatest pain. Mark thought his biological mother would open her arms to him and embrace him as her long-lost son, be that mother that he had created in his mind, but she wasn't. She was the farthest thing from the image he had conjured. I recall clearly the disappointment on his face when he first came home from the Philippines. He told me how all she saw were dollar signs when her American son had come looking for her. As he relayed the story to me, he couldn't look me in the eyes. He just kept staring at the floor. He couldn't believe he had agreed to meet his mom for the first time on TV. It had been a mistake, and he knew that now. Mark's mother used to live right outside Clark Air Force Base in Angeles City on the island of Luzon in the Philippines. Like many women her age, she made a living serving the American soldiers stationed there. The clubs surrounding the base were pretty unimaginable. Think of the stories told about Asian women and how they serviced US soldiers. They were true. Filipinas learned how to turn tricks with their bodies, shooting golf balls from their vaginas, which is actually a pretty impressive feat if it hadn't been for the disgusting circumstances that made them learn how to do it in the first place. They would play drinking games with the soldiers, like the one where Filipinas gave blowjobs until the first soldier started smiling, and then he had to drink, and then they would all drink, and the girls drank right along with them. These beautiful brown women lived lives at the service of the men stationed at the base. They really had no hope at all, yet clung to the slimmest of possibilities that a soldier would fall in love, marry them, and bring them to America. Then they could get out of the hellhole that was their life. But what really resulted were many mestizo kids living right outside the base in broken bamboo huts, while their fathers lived like kings on the base. During the 1970s and until the 90s, the US base was like a little America plopped down right in the middle of the tropical rainforest of the Philippines. The base held approximately 15,000 people in its heyday and came equipped with baseball fields, a golf course, a zoo, an arcade, and a department store. There were schools with football fields for the legitimized children of the soldiers. But right outside the base, you could see all the kids that the soldiers had fathered, the kids who could not erase their mestizo heritage. Shortly after Mark and I broke up, you can tell that was not a happy ending, I too had gone on a mission to find myself and visited the Philippines. While there, I still tried to fill the void left when we had called it quits. Even though it was over, I still in some weird way wanted to understand him and the hurt he experienced. Maybe by trying to understand what he had been through, I could understand why he left me. Maybe by helping others like him, I could help prove to him I still loved him, despite of himself. So I visited with a nonprofit that provided support services for the moms and the kids, all different ages, all different colors, all half Filipino and half American. This nonprofit was located outside another base called Subic Bay Naval Base. The US laws did not recognize these children as Americans, even though it was written all over their faces. The law only allowed these Amerasians into the US if the mother was American, but not if the father was. The only way a child could come to the US was if the father claimed the child as his, but most fathers did not. Even those that did have a tough time proving they were the fathers, even those that did have a tough time proving that they were the fathers, it was an uphill battle to bring the children to the States. So most of these kids were left in the Philippines with no support and no help from the country that created them. Mark told me he had put his mom on a pedestal all those years, and when he finally met her, she was nothing like he had imagined her to be. He could not deny that she was a prostitute. He had to admit the unthinkable, that his mom was not some perfect Miss Saigon mom who had loved his father, pined for him while he was in America, and ended up shooting herself because she could not bear the thought of someone else loving him. She had met his father while he was on the base, and while they had some sort of relationship, Mr. Sullins eventually returned to the States alone. He did not bring his son with him, and his mother went to service other US soldiers. I tried to hold and comfort him, but it was too late. I wanted to be what he needed, but I just couldn't fill the space that had been created in the vacuum where the love for his mother had been. He was just too messed up. And now there his face was on TV again, another TV where millions could see him again. But this time, instead of meeting his mom for the first time, a photo showed him holding his son. Mark looked a bit scruffier, a bit older. He had grown a beard. Why on earth did he grow a beard to cover that good-looking mestizo face of his? But this time, Mark was leaving his son, his mestizo son, to be fatherless. But this time, this father did not leave his son out of choice. I cried when I saw him. I hoped that he had eventually found himself in the years since we had met. I hoped he found peace.
Thank you, Michele. Our next reader is Razan Maharjan. He's a first-generation immigrant from Nepal who's been living in Queens since 2014. He belongs to the indigenous Newa community from Kathmandu Valley and writes poetry. He's trying to tell the untold stories of his people. Please welcome Razan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Razan Maharjan. I'm a South Asian Nepali. I'm 35 years of old. I'm sitting here with my glasses on in my dark blue shirt, and I have a orange black background here. So I'm reading this. First of all, I'm really thankful to everyone here, and especially thankful for the workshop and the fellow writers. I'm going to read my short piece here, Away from the Bells. I lived almost 3 decades of my life in one place, a neighborhood of native Newa people, full of artisans, farmers, and local businesses. The place where I was born and raised, the city I love the most, is Yala, one of the 3 major cities in the ancient valley of Kathmandu. All those years, waking up to the sounds of the bells from the temples and bahals has instilled spiritualism in my subconscious mind. It is what I lean into at times of trouble. Every morning, outside my window, I would see men and women making their morning rounds to the temples and bihars, the shopkeepers waiting at their shops for customers. Each day started with a sweet smell coming from the nearby generational halwais, malpua, guaramari, and halwa swari, my favorite breakfast. I was born into a family of Newa farmers, an honest, hardworking group of people among the diverse Newa native people of the valley. We are people who literally worship the fertile land, where we toil year-round to grow the food to feed ourselves and sell or barter the surplus for things we cannot produce: oil, salt, clothes, and garments, and other daily necessities. Eventually, farming stopped being our only occupation as a result of the modern way of living and exponential urbanization. Selling off land also became one of the sources of income for many farming families to keep up with growing needs. My parents were not able to support my elder brother and me with only what they grew from their fields, so they were forced to find other sources of income. But I'm grateful to have fond memories of spending days in fields planting and harvesting with my parents, my grandparents, and other members of the family before that life became history. My grandparents were farmers. I saw them going to field all the time. In between planting and harvesting, my grandfather would help neighbors build houses. He used to proudly tell us that he bought his land for just a few thousand rupees and built this house by making the raw bricks himself. I had no reason to disbelieve him. The brick tasa, the mold which was used to make bricks for walls of our old houses, was my toy car when I was growing up. Yes, my parents were not rich enough to buy me toys. It was my father who wanted to build a bigger house in place of the old one that my grandfather had built. I was just completing high school at the time, and I remember spending a couple of months with my whole family in a neighbor's abandoned basement space, which adjoined with our home. Thinking back, I reckon the old house would still have had a good number of decades with renovations. When I dream of home, I still see my old house. My mother never saw the inside of a school. She learned everything she needed to do at home and in the fields. She was an only daughter with 3 brothers, and they all would go to fields almost every day. She told me she even grazed cattle. Although by the time I was born, grazing cattle in the city area where we lived was very rarely seen. She could weave fabric and sew garments. I saw her learning to write her name when I was a young teen and helped her to learn the alphabet as well as numbers to do sums. She often memorized words without knowing the meaning because the language she was learning was Khas Nepali, not the Newa language, the language she could speak and understand. I didn't know how to feel about it at that time, as everything we were learning in school was either in Khas Nepali or English. I never asked, why am I not allowed to speak or learn the Newa language in school when I am speaking it with almost everyone I know, with my family and in the neighborhood, or mostly anywhere else I go to? These questions started to bother me when I realized I could only read but was unable to write my own language. Slowly, I began to learn how the Newa language, along with many other regional languages of Nepal, were suppressed through government policy. This was during a period of autocratic monarchy when only the Khas Nepali language was promoted. Unlike my mother, my father could read, write, and speak excellent Khas Nepali. However, he would not tell us up to what grade he had attended school. My father also was a farmer, but also owned a small local shop and was low-ranking government employee. He's retired now. He did not work in the fields as much as my grandparents used to at his age. The great poet of Newa language, Siddhidas, said, "Bhasa masa jati moi." If the language survives, only then will the civilization survive. I grew up speaking Newa language, but not reading or writing it. My parents ran a small local shop which had a regular subscription of daily evening Newa newspaper. This was the only newspaper my father read. I wanted to read what he was reading, so I picked it up. It was difficult at first, but eventually it became easy as it was the only language we spoke at home. Writing is way more difficult, and I'm still learning. There is a wave of consciousness amongst the younger generation to keep the language alive, which I find very hopeful. One of the great things that our people are working is effort to put Newa language, Nepal Bhasa, in Google Translate. If everything goes well, we can see it happening soon. After completing my college, I saw many of my friends successfully applying to go abroad for further studies, but I never tried to do the same. I did not really want to do that, and even if I wished to, my family would not be able to afford. Although I am not a big fan or believer in fate, it seems it had designed something else for me, something unstable for the years ahead. It would prove totally opposite to all those years of living in one place like stagnant water in an old pond. In 2010, I got married. My wife and I both had growing careers. I had graduated from an engineering college and was working in Kathmandu. My wife was practicing law after her LLM degree. Then came news of winning a lottery in a diversity visa program that would take us to New York. diversity immigrant visa program, a green card lottery in US government lottery program, which has been helping Nepalese to come to United States for many years now. Me and my wife, we both saw friends and family entering in this lottery and going to US, but we never filled it. It was very accidental. We filled it just for fun. The odds of anyone winning the lottery in first try was way too low, but my wife won the lottery. We saw it as a sign. We made a choice, seized an opportunity to seek a life with better opportunities. We decided to give up our careers and move to America in 2014. 7 years later, we have lived in half a dozen of zip codes of the boroughs of Queens. Queens is where the Nepali immigrant communities predominantly live. Each of the neighborhoods we have lived so far has shown us how diversity can flourish in one place. You can find different people, shops, and restaurants within just a few subway stops. We have lived in Woodside, Jackson Heights, Elmhurst, Corona, and most recently moved to Ocean Park. Each place has filled me with good memories. I do not have any regret about our move. The presence of strong Nepali community has helped us to not to feel homesick. However, being somewhere so foreign where I do not see smiling neighbors when I step out, or the ever-ready helping hands of friends and family when I need it, brings sadness that piles up day by day. I think more and more about my beloved hometown, Yella, reliving countless memories. I have gained great value in this new place, but I will possibly never have anything like my old home again. My wife and I have frequently discussed plans of moving out of New York because of the rents and limited living spaces, but we have stayed. It may be that we feel we have a home here, or it is our nature to look for as much stability in our lives as we can. Sometimes I feel not owning a home is a blessing because we can just pack up and explore more. And sometimes I remember that even if we eventually own a home here, it will never be how it used to be. It will never be like how my grandfather and father built their homes. I will never again wake up to the bells of bahals and temples. Thank you.
Thank you, Razan. That was lovely. Our last reader is Tija Han, a part of the Desi diaspora, a writer and teacher dreaming of transcending politics and language barriers. These days, they are writing a novel set in 1970s Bangladesh, a children's book, and narratives and memoirs to bring awareness to Asian immigration and diasporic experiences. Their work has been published in The Margins, PEN America's Dreaming Out Loud anthology, NYWC's The Journal, and more. They are self-teaching themselves piano and takes aphorisms on satchels of tea seriously. Please welcome TJ.
Hi everyone, I'm Tija Han. I am a Bangladeshi American woman. Well, I'm gender fluid. And I'm against a white wall. I'm wearing a cardigan with a collared dress. I will be sharing an excerpt from a piece called Any Day Now. I'll be sharing a Google Doc in the chat if you'd like to read along. Rumbling like an approaching train, I hear the heavy pounding, knocking on the door. They found us. I climb out of my window in a tattered nightgown with dried blood spilt on purple roses, squeeze my small, doughy body through the gap above the clunky air conditioner, traversing the rusty fire, escape, escape, escape. I look over my left shoulder. They're still after me, skipping balconies and trespassing homes, rooftop to rooftop. I look over my right shoulder. Where's my family? I wake and gasp, the same dream again and again. I'm 4 years old, maybe 5, maybe 6, maybe 20. Any day now, I'll be going back to where I came from. Flash, passport-size photographs, scuff. Don't smile, don't dare blink. Back to where I came. Sign your name like this, stand straight like this, because the cost is too great. The cost is too great. Mary Jane's on my feet, reversed. I am 8. For the first time, my shoes are on the wrong feet. How inopportune, because, sigh, I am standing for hours, but shush, not until the immigration powers that be give me permission to sit, rest, breathe, and speak. Not yet, not yet. Neither witness nor victim, but present, I shout internally to my 3rd grade teacher, who has finally learned how to pronounce my name, though I'm marked absent from school. Mommy and Papa cast their long shadows behind me as I stand before the immigration judge. Are you a boy or a girl? I hear in annoyed, inconvenienced English. Taratari, quick, put a headband on that child, I hear in anxious, fretful Bangla. Because they get to decide, they get to decide, they get to flash forward to that night, the next night, and every night after that. I lay in bed, eyes wince shut, with earnest, clasped hands. Please, 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 let me wake up somewhere else, anywhere else, animate and transform me into the main character, a young girl in Kanto named after cherry blossoms. The same dream again and again. I am 9 years old, maybe 10, maybe 11, maybe 19. Desperation. Maybe this toy will possibly activate some magic and take me into a different realm, just like on the television screen. Let me have a journey, a purpose, a life. I'm tired, yet need to make my case to the one. Hear me, I'm imploring you. Because imagination is no longer doing it for me. Because the library only lets me take out 25 books at a time, and storybooks don't have ever afters. Because it's Sunday, and public television is trying to sell me Wonder Mops and Super Fryers. Because the flickering red light on my Game Boy tells me that the batteries are about to die. So let me go to sleep and wake up somewhere entirely different and let it be permanent. Again and again, I am 3.5. Somewhere in the corner of a photograph, I stand in an overcrowded New York City apartment, unsure of where I belong, having been transported from a cold, beautiful country in Europe that has given me no birthright. And in the center sits sweaty, smiley Papa, the office salaryman turned odd job laborer, cradled by his firm forearms, an anchor baby, and the Holy Grail passport. Skip to when I'm 7. Mommy and Papa teach me and my younger sibling with a sense of urgency. Friends are not important. Don't get too attached. We may have to leave. We must send all the money beyond this place that may not keep you. Skip to when I'm 10. Forget about feel-good things like Nintendo 64s, piano lessons, and Pop-Tarts. We need to drain water out of the motherland and build an edifice somewhere in a crowded city called Dhaka and call it the Tower of Dreams. Skip to never. Never will I live in the tower, though my pictures will adorn its walls like royalty. The noxious dreams, fueled by entrepreneurial American spirit, have built an escape, a hideaway in the guise of success. How romantic, how it oversees a moat of tin slums. Again and again, I am 17. On a steep concrete hill, moments before a hopeful departure for the motherland, begins a hostile contest for power with the beloved man I once called Papa. I am wrenching at the Holy Grail. Let it go, let it go, let it go. And he is tugging at the property rights to the Tower of Dreams. Give it back, give it back, give it back. You stay here and I go there. A violent trade-off with no winners. Papa fled before the police came. An empathetic woman coaxes out the misdeeds of our dysfunctional family. I am sent to the familiar emergency room to mend my crooked pinky. Another order of protection leaves Queen's Family Court to reach someone who has relinquished his citizenship dreams. How and why? I'm 18, Mary Jane in my head, reversed. Cravings and questions envelop me. Trickster spirits find fertile ground in my brain and take root. Dreams, ungraspable, going up in smoke and vapor. I'm in a chokehold. I reach out for help should the therapeutic hands slip away. The cost is too great. The cost, the cost, the cost, the cost is too great. And then, I'm 21, and I know I'm one of the lucky ones still. Somewhere in Long Island, I've become a naturalized citizen. Somewhere in the Tower of Dreams, I've become an older sister to a half-brother I have never met. For now. Now, I pause my mind and slow 0.5 times my breath. They say our souls have been charged with all that they can bear. What if I picked this life like a kid in a toy store with no budget? That one over there, there's gonna be a lot of shit going down. Can definitely work with this. What if this was the world I received entry into after an earnest request? Indeed, one may ask in bewilderment. Indeed, I ask for you to consider. Because I prayed when I didn't even understand the one and asked to be a fucking cartoon when I was 9. Because I asked to defy nature in physics when I was 10. Because what I sought for was escape, for respite when I was 18. But that would have lifted me from my journey, my purpose, my life. Press fast forward on my soul, I have woken up, hands still clasped, animated and transformed. It sucked sometimes. I know it wasn't all my fault, but what if I chose for all this to happen?
Thank you, TJ. And thank you all for sharing your stories. I know that for some of you, this was the first time you were participating in a reading or sharing these particular stories, and you did great. I also want to acknowledge 2 other participants who weren't able to read today, but were a vital part of our workshop, Damali Abrams and Nadia Musir. I'm going to open it up now to questions for about 10 or 15 minutes. Feel free to type your question in the chat or raise your hand using the raise hand icon, and Ran and I will manage the Q&A. So if you have any questions, let us know for any of the writers.
Lisa?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. And thank you, Lou, for inviting me. Lou is, my old student from Barnard. And, I haven't seen you since then. But this was really, really wonderful. I'm like, tearing and trying to hold back tears because it was very emotional. And I just have I have a question for all of you, all of the ones who, wrote all of this down, the histories, right? The generations of just knowledge and memories. And how did you get that information? Is this all, a lot of it having to do with creativity and putting pieces together, or did you do the research? Did you have to, talk to people, the elderly, your parents and grandparents? Did you have to go to different countries? So what was the process of this? And I know, especially during the pandemic, it probably was more difficult, but just, any idea as to how you came up with these words?
Thank you, Lisa. I'll just go through because it was directed to everyone. Lou, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Thanks, Lisa, for joining. It's nice to see you. Yeah, I think this question came up maybe in the chat when I was reading too. But for me, the stories that what I wrote in my piece was sort of the accumulation of years of hearing stories, sometimes the same stories, over and over again at the dinner table. But then, some new detail will come up, from a story that I thought I had heard a million times. It just happened last night. My mom told me the story of like her dad getting really upset at her when she forgot that she was boiling an egg and went out to play. But I just learned last night that he took those like burnt egg pieces and put them in an envelope for 2 years so he could remember it and be mad at her. And I was like, why did I never know this detail? So I've had these stories kind of rattling around in my head for a long time, and writing down bits and pieces of it, sometimes recording, some of the stories they told, but I never really sat down until this workshop to try to put it all together. And just as a side note, my parents were sitting right here on a different screen watching, kind of like right next to me. And I don't think they knew what my stories were about. And then they were crying. So I was like, distracted. So I'll let other writers answer as well, but thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's so moving that your parents are right there. Rizan, would you like to address?
Yeah, mostly personally, I've written from a memory that I went through. It was the first time experience that mostly, and whenever you go back to the country, you just look around and remember something, remember more each time, the things you have forgotten. But the workshop especially, helped me to, it motivated me to write so much. So yeah, but mostly it was like memories.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. TJ, would you like to weigh in?
I think these experiences and memories were always like percolating in my mind, and just I had this quote like that's right here by Stephen Pressfield. There's a secret that real writers know that wannabe writers don't, and the secret is this: it's not the writing part that's hard. What's hard is sitting down to write. What keeps us from sitting down is resistance. So definitely spaces like this motivated me to just sit down and write. But even just opening up a piece of paper and just seeing what will come out. And something that I've held on to is which Abeer shared with us, the idea of discovery drafts. So not pressuring myself to feel like this needs to be published or people will need to see this, but more like what's gonna come out of this brain, So I think that was really helpful in just getting it all together, and also being explorative and experimental in terms of how formatting works and how we decide to organize it. Because I think sometimes, at least for me, I think of like mainstream publications and like how memory ought to be written about and things like that. But if it's for you, then it's your art. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Damali, would you like to talk about?
Well, it feels weird talking about it because I didn't share what I wrote, but yeah, I've also been wanting to write for a long time and have all of these memories, and some of them were brought more to the surface during this workshop, and then I have years and years of journals that I've been keeping as well since I was like 10 years old.
Wow, yeah, I can imagine, always, people who are writers, right? It seems like they've been writing for a while, right?
Yeah, shout out to journals. I'm also a journaler. It's a great way to keep those memories in. Michele with 1L, would you like to?
I guess to answer generally about like my approach to writing, I've been writing for a long time on and off. But during the pandemic, I really kind of went full throttle into writing because it was the only thing that made sense. It was the only thing that was meditative. But I also feel that the writing workshops that I participated in addition to this one, are really fundamental for any kind of reckoning that may happen post-pandemic. Because if we don't archive and document not just what has transpired in the past year, but also the buildup to why this year happened the way that it did, we're never again going to fully reckon what will happen. So I'm very grateful to be in community with such diverse voices, because I feel that they help in the collective processing of world occurrences.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's so interesting that, you know, hearing from these very individual stories are helpful for our collective healing. So I think, yeah, that's really great.
Thank you. Christina, would you like to comment?
I think, you know, really similar to what most people have really kind of expressed as well. I think lots of the things that were in the piece that I wrote have kind of been rattling around for a while. And the urge, I think, to write and the urge to express something was kind of building up after a while. And I think that really came, you know, during a pandemic. I think for me specifically, you know, just the way that I like to contextualize and the way that I think I like to write is very much about kind of, you know, doing very academic research. And I know that I didn't, I would love to kind of put more of that into the piece. But as far as, you know, my family, I think there's, you know, again, like there's these stories and these experiences that you have that, or that I have that kind of like I know are in the ether of the family and just continue to keep trying to grab hold of them from the ether and trying to mine them from the ether to put into something.
Yeah, thanks. I love how you talk about the urge, right? And it's kind of like it's bubbling up. It, you know, it has to. It's in there. It just has to come out. Yeah, thank you so much. I don't know if you want to go on to a different question.
Oh yeah, sorry. I wanted to also just ask Michele with two
Okay,
eyes if she wanted to weigh in.
I mean, I wrote the piece for the first time because of this workshop actually. And the only research I really did was about the bases on, you know, Google. And then I researched the law because the law actually changed regarding, you know, bringing kids into America if the kid's father versus the kid's mother. So, you know, that was the research that I had done for the piece, other than just writing from my memories because of the workshop.
Yeah. Yeah, no, when you were reading, you know, the kind of books that I love are historical fiction. So it had that piece, you know, you had the personal piece in your background. And then, you know, knowing that, ooh, you probably researched when these dates were, what the law was. So it's also real, right? So it was great. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Lisa. Yeah, we talked a lot about the personal along with the political and how to tell the bigger picture story through our little picture stories, through our own lenses. And I was, as I've told the other workshop participants over and over again, I have a bias towards the personal story. So you can never have too much of your own personal story in there, because that is a way of telling the larger story as well. Any other questions for our writers?
I think folks are interested in learning more about where they can read more about your works, whether it's published or not, or it's in the planning stage.
I think, yeah, Michele had dropped in a link to where you can read some more of her work. Does anyone have any thoughts about or want to comment on anything they have published or where they are in their writing careers?
So I'm in a fellowship with Pen America called Dreaming Out Loud to give voice to folks that have gone through the immigration experience or are undocumented. So that was kind of like my first, I guess, beginning in understanding the world of publishing and then balancing that with the personal aspect, which is writing. And I recommend it to folks. They, I think, take applications every year, and it's open to all folks wherever they are in their experience. And that was a really great way to open myself up to this world that felt a little bit intimidating. I'm not going to front. It still kind of does, but being in that space motivated me to continue writing. So now I'm working on a children's book, which is metaphorical in how children process war, as well as a novel. And I told the class, like, I've been working on it for 5 years, but that's okay. It takes the time that it needs to take, which is based around South Asia post-partition and the effects of that in diaspora, which I'm sure we all have like themes of that running through our pieces. And yeah, I think I'm an emerging writer, I would consider, and this workshop is helping me to like gain more confidence as well as skill to put my stuff out there, not doubt myself. It's still a process, so yeah. Oh, and just like Michele Gilliam, I'm also taking workshops at New York Writers Coalition, free, just putting that plug out there. And it's a really great space to like learn and grow and write.
Thank you, TJ. Someone asked what the name of the PEN program was. Maybe you can drop it in the chat. And yeah, the rest of you don't have to talk about, you could just talk about where your work, the piece that you read today, how it fits into your, what your larger view of that work, maybe it's part of a book or some essays. So feel free to jump in.
So I'll say that so that was an excerpt from a memoir I'm working on called A Mad Woman in Her Most Incandescent Bloom. I've been fortunate to work on 3 different presidential campaigns and for one of the a big union here in the city. And to do that as a Black woman, I feel like I should write about it because much has been said about what has transpired in the last 5 years, but I want to use my personal story to just maybe illuminate corners of the overarching narrative that are often glossed over.
So I have another question. This is just, are all of you writers? Or is this something that, regular people like us, if we feel that urge or that inspiration that we can actually achieve? Or is this, so it sounds like a lot of you are writers. And I know that Lou, you were an English major, right? Also with psychology, I think. So are all of you, do you have the kind of long-term background as writers in English, or is this something that, you just kind of picked up and it kind of snowballed and it was just natural for you?
I love that question. And before I let anyone else answer, I'm going to say they are all writers. They joined a writing workshop and they all wrote these brilliant pieces. And so in my mind, they're writers. And I think that's what makes you count as a writer, is if you're working on something. At least that's the way I started. I joined an MFA program, jumping from a very different career into writing. And I did it by starting an MFA. And I told myself I was going to call myself a writer from day one, even if it was only going to embarrass myself into becoming a writer, but I was just going to say the words. So anyway, that's my preamble, but I would love for others to jump in and tell us what you think.
That's great. Thank you very much. Yeah, I guess I only asked that because I'm, one of those kinds of people who, would never call myself a writer. Even if I do write, and I might write in, for psychology journals, or I might write, I even wrote a book in Korean, but it's more academic kind of, and I've never, I've always had that lack of confidence. And I know that, some people talked about confidence, but it's interesting that I would never say I'm a writer. But anyway, I think that gives me a lot to think about and kind of feel optimistic about it.
Yeah, I think I relate to that. I mean, I guess I'm a writer now because Abeer just called us all writers. So check. But really, as an English major, I was more into reading, I think. And I enjoyed writing papers. I took creative writing classes. I think a part of me always wanted to be a writer, but I think my idea was like, well, maybe if I get published one day, then I'm a writer. So I think I would always bring it up as like an interest or a hobby, or, you know, I would joke about it almost like, you know, I would joke about it beforehand so no one else could joke about it, right? So I would say like, I'm an aspiring writer, haha, you know. But I'm not really sure if that sheepishness really got me anywhere. But you know, we asked Abeer too, I think on our very last workshop. This group has been fabulous. We all, I mean, the workshops with this group were 2 hours long, but our last workshop 2 weeks ago lasted, we all were there an extra hour. So we sat there for 3 hours because none of us wanted to hang up. And, you know, we were asking Abeer all these questions, and I didn't know until then that Abeer had left a career in like business, right? You were in business school, and it was kind of a very interesting switch. I think, you know, it's a scary thing to do, and it's safer to just, for me, keep it on the side and say, you know, this is something that I do for fun, or, you know, it's important to me personally, but it's not my main thing. But in reality, it's probably the most important part of my identity, or what's most meaningful to me. It's just scary, you know, to say that. So I feel like I'm still, I mean, I think we all write in that it's a way to process thoughts and feelings, or record. So, or to ramble as I'm doing now. But anyway, I'll let other people answer. But thanks for the question.
I just saw that TJ, right? Is that your name? Yeah, TJ just wrote in Korean. Thanks for that.
Razan, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was like I think someone wrote in the chat, we can all be writers. You know, I did not. I was really. I do not want to call myself a writer, but like after this workshop and after Abeer said that, you know, yeah, you are all writer. You know, you've written this piece. You know, before the workshop, I personally, this is after a really long time that I've written something in the prose. I mean, like long form writing, and I was really scared of attending this workshop because, you know, like, you know, English is not even my first language, not even my second language. Like, this is my third language, and I've written. So, like, I think you can be a writer if you sit down and you know, write about what you have, you know, in your mind. And mostly for me, for someone like me who have written like mostly poems, writing the memoir or long form is very, I mean, like I'm not comfortable writing this because I'm more comfortable being ambiguous, you know. I'm so but this workshop has really helped us, and, you know, I think we all can become writer. You know, I'm not even, I have a very technical background. I don't even have a, you know, writing background. You know, in my academic, you know, I'm an engineer. I work in IT. I mean, like, I don't even have anything to do with when people, you know, some of my friends, they don't even know that I write. Right? So like we're all discovering that writer part of us. So, you know, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I think I agree that, you know, I will accept the label as writer, but I maybe don't internally identify with it quite yet. And I think, you know, I really empathize with, you know, I majored in history. So, you know, a lot of the things that I did was, you know, this kind of very academic, very dry, very technical writing. And I think so doing this process is kind of felt like that merging of something that I like reading really dry and I like writing really academic. But I think this particular type of writing, you know, talking about this urge is maybe kind of, you know, saying for the first time kind of writing or expressing something for me through that very academic, through that very dry type of writing. So yeah, I think that's the way that I kind of came into it.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you all.
I have a question. Is there time?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Julie.
Okay, I'll put my camera on. This is a question for Abeer. As being an educator myself, I'm sure that these stories were not written on the first day. Like, what kind of prompts did you use? And it seems like it must have taken a tremendous amount of time to really shape these stories. I mean, they were all so excellent. I really enjoyed them, enjoyed them. And I've said to Abeer, oh, I think they should become a book of stories, you know, about queens. I mean, it's so much about queens, right? So what were the prompts? How did you get your students to shape them so beautifully?
I'm happy to say that I actually gave no prompts at all. I just said, I gave all of them just, you know, a word count. I said, here, in 2,000 words, send me something. It doesn't have to be complete or finished or polished. It just has to be a personal story of yours, something that you think is important that you want to write about. You know, I also did not, because of we kind of made a little bit of a flub with like organizing the timing of the workshop. I didn't give people enough time for the very first like set of 4 people. And so I know for sure, like one of them, at least, Michele Gilliam, wrote the thing in like 3 days, like her first piece, which was amazing. She just like kind of clacked it out and then like sent it in. And then we just workshopped it and talked about it in workshop the first class. But yeah, in terms of prompts, I feel like everyone has a story to tell. That's what one of the things I love about Memoir. There's always something in your life that you think is important to you that you would like to write about. And so I didn't have to give a prompt as such. When I run like free writing workshops, I will give prompts because it can be kind of daunting. But because this workshop is it's described as a workshop on race and immigration. And so the people who signed up for it, you know, the other participants, presumably came into it thinking about those lenses and maybe some of the stories they'd like to tell. And some, you know, some people in this workshop were writing these stories for the first time, or, you know, presenting them in a workshop format for the first time. And I was just really impressed with like how, you know, deep and thoughtful and really profound you know, these stories were. I was just amazed. My work in the workshop, at least what I kind of spend a lot of time thinking about, was how to run the workshop in a way that was positive and supportive and kind and thoughtful, and just kind of throwing the workshop model that I had learned over 20 years, which was, you know, very like, it's the Iowa model where you just, the writer doesn't get to say anything. You know, everyone kind of discusses the story and like gives you all these critiques and, you know, suggestions. And I wanted to move away from that and center the author, figure out what they wanted to, you know, like who their ideal audience is, for example, or, you know, potential audience, what they were trying to do with the work, and then have us kind of talk about that, like what we loved, and also frame all of our so-called critiques in terms of questions. So it was a conversation with the writer, and the writer would have the choice to either answer a question or not, or answer it in the way that they wanted to. So that was kind of my work in this workshop, was to try to keep that conversation in that framework, and also just keep centering the author.
So you never looked at the work in progress and edited, made editorial suggestions or?
I mean, yeah, so every writer had a chance to submit work twice, and everybody would read that work and give feedback, both on the document itself if they wanted to, and then also during the workshop we would give comments. And so, yeah, that's how we ran the workshop. And I'd love for the other workshop participants to talk a little bit about what that experience was like, being in a workshop, especially for some of you who were doing it for the first time.
But just lastly, how many weeks was it? How many weeks?
4 classes over 8 weeks. So we had a class every 2 weeks to give people enough time to write a new piece or to revise an older piece if they wanted to. So that was the structure of it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie. Do others have, any of the workshop participants have any thoughts about how the workshop format worked or what it was like to be in the workshop?
Go ahead, TJ. Excuse me. Really quickly, I also just wanted to add that there was another thing that was very Queens about this workshop and it spoke to the diversity of it was that, I mean, this year has been very, very trying with a lot of high profile incidents of hate crimes, of racially targeted, state-sanctioned murder, when you name it. But I do appreciate that in this workshop, we allow for moments of pause and recognition of how such incidents also uniquely impacted some of the participants. So I just wanted to speak to that context.
Thank you, Michele.
Yeah, I want to echo what Michele said verbally, but also what she mentioned in the chat about Abeer sharing pieces with us from different writers. So I'm thinking Mira Jacob, I'm remembering excerpts from Citizen Kane, Natalie Diaz's poems, and they were all different ways of telling a story. Some were visual, some were like comics, some were poems. So, and then on top of that, being aware that our classmates are submitting different things as well. So I came into the space like trusting that something would come because I was going to be inspired. And just not really putting pressure on myself, just knowing that it's gonna happen and I'm gonna be there for it because I'm gonna sit down for it. So I think it was just, I think maybe I don't mean to speak for everyone, but I will speak for myself, but I was definitely inspired by fellow workshop participants. And I sense that's what happened with other people. I don't want to assume, but I think that was definitely part of the process. And what I also appreciated about this particular workshop, which was the first for me, was focusing on the things that we loved about the pieces and then asking questions about places where it may not necessarily, like, we just were curious about. And I really appreciated that because the questions piece of it helps to create space for the writer themselves to answer. And I think the Iowa workshop model, it seems like, does not have that model. It's almost like the writer's not in the room. We're going to keep referring to them as the narrator, the writer, the author, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas someone would be like, hey, TJ, when you wrote this, I was wondering about this, and I'll have the space to answer it, which I think helps to process what works for us too. I think the verbal piece of it is really important for processing. And just sharing the success of it, I introduced this idea to that PEN America Dreaming Out Loud workshop. And the workshop facilitator, Hannah Kingsley Ma, really liked that approach. And so we're using that question approach too. So I just wanted to like share that.
That's great.
I just want to add quickly that, well, first I linked an article about Abeer's approach from Electric Literature, because I found this article after we'd already been through a couple of workshop sessions. And this article was about, Abeer's like approach to critique and workshopping. And I was like, oh yeah, that's like very consistent with what this workshop has been like. But I cannot imagine a workshop about focused on memoir and autobiography, like being run in any other way, right? Because it is such a like vulnerable and deeply personal. I mean, all writing is personal to some degree, but I think this is especially, a lot of this stuff people wrote about was very raw, and some of it was painful, some of it was funny. But I think this approach really helped all of us to feel comfortable not only sharing our own work, but in reading and approaching other people's work, which I was also kind of nervous about, in terms of how to best, read and be able to participate meaningfully in that kind of exchange. So I guess I'm spoiled now because I expect all workshops to be this great.
That's great. And I will say that if you do encounter workshops that aren't working for you, tell the workshop facilitator or leader, and ask for what you need and what you think is going to be helpful or useful or supportive for you. Thank you for that, Lou. Does anyone else want to just jump in? Any of the other writers want to have any last words? We're sort of at the end of our thing, but I would love for if someone had, if I didn't get to somebody, maybe Michelle with 2 L's. I don't know if you're still here. It's all right. I don't want to, yeah. Okay, so I think we are towards the end of our time, so we're gonna sign off. I wanna thank everyone for coming and listening, and especially to the readers and to the writers for your readings. And I think Ran is gonna have a little note at the end, and I am gonna ask for the writers to just stay on for a little bit after, after the end. But yeah, Ran, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Abeer, and thank you to all the wonderful readers, workshop participants. I myself also really enjoyed hearing your works. And just really quickly, I shared in the chat links for folks to stay tuned with our writers and other programs at the Lewis Latimer House Museum. We host regular writing workshops and reading events. One of the recent series, including this one, and also we had a reading and discussion series on Audre Lorde last fall, which we might continue later this year. So please stay tuned, and thank you, everyone.
All right, I think it's just us now. Yay.